Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to another World of Tanks review. This time we are looking at the French Tier 5 heavy tank, the BDR G1B. As ever, or as usual, I'll try and give a little bit of a historical roundout for this tank before we get into things. So, where does this thing fit in the big wide world of military history? Well, in the 1930s, the French military put forward a proposal, well, not really a proposal, but they had a design brief that required being fulfilled. The idea was that they needed armoured divisions that were able to cover 200 kilometres per day. There was no existing French tank that was capable of doing this. And as a result, a bid was put out for companies to design a machine that was up to snuff. So the idea was that this would be a tank weighing no more than 20 tons, that would have between 40 and 60 millimeters of armour, and would come with a 47mm gun. Many proposals were put forward from a variety of different companies, all of which had problems. One that struck me as particularly amusing, well, okay, amusing is perhaps the wrong word, but there was one design where the commander was seated in such a position that the shells being ejected from the gun, the spent cartridges, would be ejected straight at his face, which seems like a decidedly suboptimal design feature, but there we go. It's worth pointing out, of course, these shells will be, they've just freshly been used. Gunpowder has just been going bang. I mean, these are going to be big lumps of hot, probably sharp, and definitely heavy metal heading at your face. Anyway. Lots of designs were put forward. In the end, none of them were actually accepted, which is kind of a little bit of a shame, because one of the designs that was put forward was this thing, BDR G1B. Now, it was rejected, as I said, because it was just too big and too heavy. The thing is, the design requirements for the technology level at the time would have been incredibly difficult for anyone to actually meet, so it was almost asking for the impossible. This thing did have the 40 to 60 millimeters of armour that were requested, coming in at the higher end of that, thicker armour rather than thinner. It had in excess of 47mm gun, actually packing a 75mm gun, and it had other things that were of note, like the rangefinder, for example, up here on the turret. This would have been a tank far ahead of anything else manufactured at the time. Remember that at the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, the most advanced tank that saw service at that time was the French Char B1, and this thing would have blown that out of the water. Nonetheless, we never got to see this tank from a historical perspective, but we do have it here in the game as the French Tier 5 Heavy. So what do we actually get? Well, let's just quickly look at the tech tree first. Very briefly, I don't want to spend long doing this. We've got the BDR G1B here at Tier 5. Leading up to it, we have the FT, the Tier 1. Who cares how good it is? It's just a Tier 1. You're going to get through it as soon as you can. The D1 at Tier 2 is terrible. The D2 at Tier 3 is terrible. The B1 at Tier 4 feels terrible the first time you play it. It's not actually that bad. It does get limited matchmaking, but it has significant problems, not least of which is the gun. And then you get up to the BDR G1B here at Tier 5. You've had to wade through whole bunches of awful to get here. So how does this thing stack up? Well, the suspension and the turret, obviously, as with every tank in this game, are unique to the machine, so you're going to have to unlock those. The engine is also not something you're likely to have already unlocked, unless you've played down the French tank destroyers to at least Tier 6, because the ARL V39 is based on the chassis of the BDR, or the Renault G1, the French medium tank at Tier 5, which is basically a BDR with some slightly different characteristics. So you won't have the engine. Radios, you'll have the intermediate radio for what it's worth. The top radio you should have from the Char B1 at Tier 4, so you'll have those, yippee-ki-yay, but this is kind of the bit of the kick in the nuts. Your stock gun here is a pretty woeful 75mm gun. It's an upgrade over the gun on the Char B1 at Tier 4, but 74mm of penetration, only 91 with premium on a Tier 5 tank with garbage accuracy. No, thank you very much. This is the stock gun that you're going to be using, unfortunately. unless you have played some of the French medium tanks up to at least tier 4, you're not going to have the second gun unlocked. There your penetration jumps up to 100, 129 with APCR. Still a 75mm gun, still 110 average damage, still garbage accuracy. This is not a very good gun, but it is just about good enough to be getting on with. So my strong recommendation is that you find 2,700 free XP down the back of the sofa and use it to get this 75mm gun just to make the BDR playable. Then you need the turret, which is another 2,500 experience, and then you need the top gun, and you do want the top gun. I would just like to make that very, very clear. You do want the top gun, 1, because it really makes this tank, and 2, because it makes your grind on the ARL at tier 6 much more palatable when you're not having to use the stock 76mm gun on the damn thing. So that's the grind for you. What is it we actually get in game? Well, as ever, I'm going to talk about the gun separately in a short while, but worth noting that it is really the selling point of the tank. 650 hit points for a tier 5 heavy tank is not the highest out there. You have the Churchills and the OI Experimental up at the top of the bracket with sort of around 700 health. And then everyone else is usually pottering somewhere in the 600. 650 isn't terrible for a tier 5 heavy, but it's not fantastic. Armour, we'll talk about this more in detail later, but 60, 40, 60 leaves a little bit to be desired. And the turret armour 80, 70, 60. Your angling is not particularly good. Armour on this tank could at best be described as decidedly mediocre. Mobility, this is a 37-ton tank with a 450 horsepower engine, giving it a specific power of around about 12 horsepower per ton, 30 kilometers an hour forwards, 10 backwards, top speeds. The mobility isn't completely woeful, but again, the mobility could kind of be described as decidedly mediocre. This is going to be a theme. Concealment, it's a heavy tank, who really cares? Spotting ability, oh dear. 320 meters view range with the stock turret, that's not good. Even for tier 5, it's not particularly good. Signal range is great, but I mean, who cares? The view range, not fantastic at all. Yeah, it's a bit painful. So let's just talk about the gun. I've already mentioned the 75mm guns. You don't want to use these things any more than you really have to. You certainly don't want to use the stock gun at all unless you really have to. So the 90mm gun is the moneymaker on this tank. It's a 90mm gun, Dadoy, I just said that. 6.32 rounds per minute rate of fire, 135 penetration, 240 alpha damage. That pen goes up to 175 with APCR ammo. HE rounds, 45 pen, 320 alpha. 0.4 dispersion at 100 meters is not good, but it's workable. 2.5 second aim time is also not good. Really, it's that alpha damage that you want to be considering. This is really where the tank shines. 240 alpha damage at tier 5, that's quite a lot. You will meet tanks that you can one-shot with that. Tier 3s, boom, dead. Really satisfying. Heck, there are probably some tier 4s you can one-shot with that. Maybe you need a slightly high damage roll, but whatever. It will two-shot tier 5 medium tanks. It's very Russian, the gun, really. You roll round a corner, you derp someone in the face, you roll back, and then like 8 seconds later, you rinse and repeat. It's not a complex gun to use, but it can definitely be effective. Everything else about the tank is kind of meh, but the gun is not too bad. To back it up, it has 8 degrees of gun depression, which is actually not too shabby at all. You do have to bear in mind, if you're trying to use your 80mm of turret armour and that 8 degrees of gun depression, that before you get to shoot anybody, you will have to deal with the plague of mid-tier French tanks, the top hat. It means that people will be able to shoot you long before you can shoot them. So this is not a hull-down monster or anything. It is literally just poke, boom, poke back. 1500 DPM is not particularly fantastic. So do bear in mind that if you have to shoot your way out of trouble, it really is the alpha damage that you're relying on and not the DPM, not the pew-pew factor. So that is worth having in the back of your head. Crew skills, equipment, all of that jazz. Well, in terms of your crew, nothing hugely surprising here. It's tier 5, you may not even have one fully upgraded crew skill on your crew, but all the same, 6th sense on your commander. Safe storage on your loaders, probably not a bad idea. I haven't actually noticed any particular ammo rack problems with this tank, but still probably not a bad idea to go with safe storage. Repairs on everyone else, and then you can go with Brothers in Arms, Snapshot, Smooth Ride, all the usual good stuff that you would take on a tank or on a heavy tank. Equipment, well, your DPM is not particularly great. I mean, medium gun rammer is a good choice regardless of what your tank is, so gun rammer would be my recommendation. Then probably improved vents, just all round gives your tank a buff, though it is worth pointing out that the improved vents is 600,000 credits for improved vents class 3. I mean, because it's a heavy tank, but that's expensive on a machine that... Well, how much does this thing actually cost in terms of credits? On a machine that costs 400,000 credits, I'm then saying you want to spend 600,000 credits on one piece of equipment. You can see where this is going. If you are just trying to grind through this tank, you might want to skip that. An enhanced gun laying drive is also not a terrible option, but again, maybe a little bit on the pricey side. I wouldn't bother with any view range enhancing equipment because you're going to struggle to get much out of that 320 meter view range. I ran this machine with gun rammer, vents, and an enhanced gun laying drive. That's what I used. You can't use a vertical stabilizer because this thing is only tier 5. Bit of a shame, but there it is. C'est la vie. What are you going to do? I don't think... Oh, no, just quickly before we move on. Ammunition, well, your HE rounds are actually not too bad, so it's not a bad idea to take some of those. I don't think I ever had to fire a single round of APCR out of this gun, but I did have 5 just in case. You don't have a particularly stingy ammo loadout for 240 alpha damage. You get 48 rounds of ammunition. Go wild on different ammo types if you want. That's fine. Consumables, I've just got your standard 3 ones. Medkit, medkit, repair kit, and fire extinguisher. Didn't have any particular problems with fire or anything like that, though the kind of dubious armor means you get penetrated quite a bit, and so your crew do sometimes fall over, which is a little bit unfortunate. So I definitely do recommend having a med kit of some description there. With all that said and done, I think it's about time we had a look at some gameplay. Just before we get into the action, a couple of quick things to say about this tank. Firstly, that 8 degrees of gun depression is all around the machine. There's no weird bits that are going to freak you out. Also, to quickly point out that in terms of things like crew locations and module locations, there's nothing hugely surprising. Fuel tanks and engine are towards the rear of the tank, as you can kind of see. This hatch on the front is indeed where the driver hides. Again, nothing too surprising. One thing to note though, this view range finder, the commander kind of sits up there, so when you inevitably get shot in this section, do bear in mind your commander's going to get taken out. So again, I would like to re-emphasize the importance of a repair kit. Having a quick look at the armor, well, it's nothing too impressive. From the rear, 60mm, but this bit, for some obscure reason, because it slopes back towards the rear, this section is only actually 15mm of armor, meaning that you can penetrate this with any gun you're going to come across this thing with. Honestly, HE rounds would go through the rear of this tank if you know what you're doing. And any gun that is larger than 45mm in caliber will completely overmatch that plate. And at this tier, 47mm guns are fairly common, so do bear that in mind. Side armor, 60mm as advertised. Above that, there's a bit of 40mm because screw you, of course there is. I mean, you've got some suspension at some tracks as well, but it doesn't actually offer as much protection as you might like on this particular tank. Front of the hull is the advertised 60mm everywhere, pretty much. Some bits are angled back, see this plate here for example, and you can get the odd bounce here or there, but you really shouldn't be relying on it. If you angle your hull something like this, you're going to end up with 97. You're going to need more on the side. Yeah, the best you're going to get out of this is probably around about 95-ish millimeters of effective armor front and sides. In the case of the turret, you have 60mm at the rear of the turret, as it said in the garage, 70 from the side, and then your 80 from the front. Bear in mind, however, that the 80 from the front is only this very frontal plate. The rest is 70mm, but at least sloped back at a good angle. Once you throw in things like the gun mantlet, you can get some regions that are about 200mm thick. You can also get some regions where there's an armor hole, because of course they had to put the gun somewhere. The rangefinder, that's the word, machine gun turret thingamajiggy here, isn't actually a weak spot. It is still 80mm thick, but do bear in mind that the commander lives there. That will be exposed whenever you try and shoot someone and whatnot, so shooting the tank here is still a good idea. Also worth bearing in mind, if at all possible, if you can get yourself in such a position where most of this pimple is hidden, that's great. So say like you're coming around a corner, it is better to come around a corner from that direction and hide. So if the corner's here, you can hide that dirty great top hat, rather than coming around, if this is your wall, say, coming around this way, and then you end up exposing that top hat and people just shoot you there. So do bear that in mind. The armor, however, is not anything too impressive on this tank. You don't have some of the really funky angles that you find on the KV-1. So despite the KV-1, for example, having on paper thinner frontal hull armor, in reality it's actually better armored than the BDR. Anyway, enough blather from me, let's go and have a look at that gameplay at last. Here we go then in our top tier match. This is a tier 5 game, it's entirely tier 5, so no one-shotting of tier 3s, as entertaining as that might otherwise be. And trust me, this thing can one-shot tier 3s. We're going to be going down towards the G9 kind of region. Going down there because, well, as a place to go and fight, it does have problems. I mean, you tend to be a little bit vulnerable to artillery. And once you have successfully won that corner, assuming you do, of course, you often run into campers up at F4 shooting you in the face or the side as you try and advance toward their base. But there's only one tank destroyer on the enemy team, so we'll see how it goes. And honestly, there isn't really a better place to go on this map in a tank that likes to be right in your face and isn't that fast. So we're going to run with it anyway and see how things proceed. Looks like the enemy team, or the heavies on the enemy team, have a kind of similar idea here. So we are likely going to be facing off against a KV-1 and a couple of OI experimentals, aiming at that KV-1, but we don't let the reticule fully aim because we don't want to give him a chance to aim at us, and his gun reloads relatively quickly, unlike ours. Ours hits harder, and that's not that often you say that in a French tank, comparing it with a Soviet machine, but there we go. And there were the OI experimentals doing their thing, and that shot just critically hit the KV-1's turret, probably a viewport damaged or something like that we don't really care about. So just trying to see if we can get a shot on any of these fellows. KV-1, if that guy hadn't ground against me from behind, maybe I'd have been able to shoot him, but as it is, he did, so I wasn't. Not reliably anyway. Take this shot here, and sounds like we've done a critical hit, probably taken out the guy's tracks and done him some damage. He hits me back, I take 125 and deal out 263. Next KV-1, we do 255 to him. He only takes our tracks out. And the gun's almost loaded, and there goes the KV-1 who was behind a rock. So there's an OI experimental and a KV-1 around here. OI experimental fails to hit us, we fail to hit him, you know, fair enough. That's all grand. And next, anything interesting? KV-1. He puts a shot into us, we put a shot into him, but again, he hits us for 153, we hit him for 244. Our gun hits harder, so we will outtrade a KV-1. You just don't want to sit in front of it letting him aim. Someone else picks up that kill, unfortunately, as we pull the trigger. So, yeah, c'est la vie. And there goes the enemy OI Experimental and their Chaffee, and there are 5 tanks remaining on the enemy team, and their camping G1R manages to take out one of our allies. We kill the T-34. Our driver has unfortunately been taken out, which is a little bit of an inconvenience. And we get hit by the AMX French artillery piece. Ugh. So we're just going to go up here into this little hollow and, well, hide, basically. And if you have a quick look, you can see that our armour so far hasn't really achieved a great deal of much. One shot got eaten by our tracks, but that's now to do with our armour itself. We haven't bounced a single shot. And this is a, well, if you will, a top tier game. At least it's a game where we're not against higher tier machines. Take a punt against that G1R and put a nice big fat shot through the rear of his turret. He will probably die before we get another shot off. 82 over there as well. And then that just leaves the artillery. It's just the 3 of them left now, of course. I'm just going to speed this along a little bit, because the BDR isn't the fastest machine in the world. Just the AT2 remaining. Very unlikely that we're going to get a shot on this guy. Our team is closing in and that guy is pretty screwed. And there we go. As it is, the game is over. So, let's go and have a look at the post-battle stats for this one. There we go. That game ended up being enough for second class mastery, fire for effect, and hand of God medals. 1,105 damage done, 1 kill, 629 base experience, finished 4th on our team by experience earned. Not a particularly long game, but it did the job nicely. The match only lasted just a shade over 5 minutes. 9 shots fired, 6 hit, 5 penned for that damage count, most of which was from pretty close range. 5 hits received, 4 penetrated, 1 did not. But that was some splash damage from something. It wasn't really our armour doing any good. 4 enemy vehicles damaged, 1 of them destroyed, 37 assistance damage, 1.27 kilometers travelled, and for a 5-minute match, with a standard account, 13,500 credits profit, or with a premium account that would have been basically 23,000 credit profit. So, this machine is actually quite profitable. It's tier 5, which helps, and it has a gun that is capable of doing very respectable amount of damage, which also helps. So, all those things considered mean this tank is quite profitable. This was, of course, a top tier match, and even then our armour didn't do a great deal of much. But we were able to do some damage. Let's have a look at the other end of the scale and switch to a bottom tier game. Tier 7 match then here on Pilsen, and, well, you'll see what the BDR is able to do, I guess. It's a 3-5-7 matchmaking template. So the only tier 7s on the enemy team are a Comet, an IS-2, and an AMX M445. Not exactly the most heavily armoured tanks in the world. In fact, looking at the tanks on the enemy team, the only ones we might struggle to penetrate, really, are the AMX, maybe the IS-2 if we don't have the opportunity to aim, and I guess the T-150. This is a patch 9.18 replay, as was the previous one, so the OI Experimental still has the 10cm gun and is more mobile and doesn't have quite the armour that it gets subsequently given, just for your information. So, we're going over towards the sort of rubbly area over here. It's where the heavy tanks go to fight it out. And we are still a heavy tank, even though technically we're bottom tier. If you have a look at our alpha damage, the only tanks on the enemy team that actually beat us in terms of alpha damage are the IS-2, assuming he's using the top gun, and the OI Experimental, again assuming he's using the top gun. We have the same alpha damage as the AMX M445. Oh, and the Dicamax, sorry, he has 300. We have the same alpha damage as the Hellcat, and more than everyone else. So, we'll see what we can do. Remember, 135 penetration, 240 alpha damage. Just as a warning, I think I said in the garage that I didn't remember firing any APCR rounds. As I record this, I am reminded of the fact that I think I fired 1 or 2 in this particular game, just to kind of try and secure things. So, it may well be that I'm slightly mistaken and you see an APCR round or 2 fired this match, but I certainly don't spam it everywhere. First shot goes into a Hellcat, we trade with him. Same alpha damage, we low roll at 225, it's not the end of the world, but yeah. And 235 into the side of the turret on that AMX M445. He has fired, and we decided to snap one into the KV-1. It was an easier shot, and I didn't really want to risk anyone shooting me, as best as I could at least, so I tried not to just sit there and aim that one. IS-2 around here, and it's here that I load the APCR, because I'm expecting potentially to face him frontally, and 135 penetration isn't bad, but may not cut the mustard if you have to shoot a tier 7 heavy tank from the front. As it is, we catch that guy in the side, and put that shot in, and this shell, okay, this one might have made a difference, firing APCR compared to armor piercing. We just go for the turret cheek, just there, and put one through that. There's kind of a weak point. It's a weak point on a lot of tanks, the turret cheeks. And on the IS series of tanks, the turret isn't the strongest bit of armor in the world anyway. So that is where your APCR can make a difference. The previous APCR round we fired, it ended up going into his side. It didn't really matter. So we've hit exactly 1,000 damage in this match so far and picked up 1 kill. And we are just going to see how much more damage we can get done before the game ends, as it doesn't look like this match is going to be an especially long one. We decide to head back towards our base just to make sure that it doesn't fall. I'm just going to speed this along a little bit because, you know, BDR, not the slowest tank in the world, but certainly not the fastest. We've still got about 2/3 of our hit points remaining, roughly speaking. So we do have some hit points we can trade if necessary, and we can't expect the armor to do a great deal of much, so it may well be that we do have to trade some hit points. We put 1 shot into that VK, who, he's actually stock, but he's not even looking at us. And he repairs, we put another shot into him, and low roll for 188, leaving him on 15 health. An average damage roll would have killed him with room to spare, but we seriously low rolled, and yeah, c'est la vie. So just this VK, and then the Comet remaining, and that will be that. Speed this along a little bit again, and, well, they're both dead. We don't get to see any more action ourselves, and that is the match. That game ended up being enough for second class mastery. Battle Buddy, that's not something you get in a particular game, that's just something you get for not having shot an ally in a while. And Fire for effect. We finished second on our team by experience earned. In fact, if you have a look at the team, the top 4 tanks were all bottom tier. The Excelsior shouldn't even have been in that match. He gets preferential matchmaking, but he formed a dumb platoon, so go figure. And both of the top team tanks on our team were BDRs. 1,437 damage done, 1 kill, 799 base experience, 7 shots all hit, all penetrated. Voila. 5 enemy vehicles damaged, 1 of them destroyed, and a 20,000 credit profit. Now do bear in mind with that, I'm pretty sure, can't remember why, but I'm pretty sure we already had some ammunition bought, certainly some APCR rounds I think we already had in the store, so that cost is not included in this, so do bear that in mind. With those 2 APCR rounds we fired, our actual profit from that match was probably closer to, say, 12 to 15,000 credits, something like that off the top of my head. Nonetheless, still managed to make a respectable profit in the 4.5 minutes that match lasted. So, yeah, it ended up being a pretty decent game, and of those 2 APCR rounds that we fired, we didn't actually in the end need to fire either of them, but I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, let's go and round things off in the garage, having had a look at some gameplay. Overall thoughts then on the BDR? Well, the first time I played this tank, when I was initially grinding through the French lower tiers, low to mid tiers of their heavy tanks, I didn't like this thing. I really, really didn't like it. The long aim time on the gun, the bad accuracy, I just did not get on with it. Having rebought it, it's not my favourite tank in the world, and I'm not going to keep it, but it's not bad. The 240 alpha damage on this gun is really, really nice. And until they introduced the OI Experimental, that was actually the highest alpha tier 5 heavy tank. Now if we have a look at the OI Experimental, at the moment it still has this 10cm black gun, which is obscene for a tier 5 heavy. But in a future patch, apparently that gun is going to be removed, so the BDR will once again regain its crown of Alpha Damage King at tier 5 on a heavy tank. This is excluding howitzers, of course. The ability to just pop round and hit someone for 240 is really nice. Do bear in mind, however, this thing excels at close range engagements where you don't need to let the gun fully aim, kind of like a Soviet 122mm armed tank at, say, tier 7, like the IS. In fact, actually, this tank is quite like the IS. It has that gun, it doesn't have the armour to really take many hits. The mobility, though, is kind of mediocre. It's not for everyone. This tank sometimes struggles when bottom tier, just because you don't have the accuracy and aim time and whatnot to aim for weak spots. Having said that, if you can penetrate your target, 240 alpha is very nice. You know, you need to penetrate your target half the number of times that a Cromwell or something does. So that is quite a nice feature. But this tank is really all about that 240 alpha damage on the gun. If you like that, great. If you don't, oh dear, it's probably a bit of a Marmite tank. If you know what you're doing with it, however, it is not a bad tank to play, and I think this thing gets a bit of an unfairly poor reputation. It is better than a lot of people would have you believe. Just bear in mind its limitations. Anyway, hope you guys found that vaguely informative and or enjoyable. If you did, by all means feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel. And as ever, I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.